All right, guys, this could get a little controversial. So I got this video from Elephants in the Room, Ken Lacorte, which is a channel with 795,000 subscribers. And a month ago, they released this video, The Myths About Gay Tolerance Through History. So I'm really curious because this could go two ways, based or bullshit. Let's have a look. Let's go.
What was it like to be gay across human history? This question was a whole lot harder to answer than I thought it'd be, because I first kept hitting the same story. Ancient Greece and Rome were relatively tolerant. Even the Islamic world celebrated same-sex love in its greatest poetry. And with the exception of the rise of Christianity, history has largely moved towards acceptance. But the more I dug into it, the more that story fell apart.
Okay, now, right, okay, so that was the bullshit. Love it. So that was the bullshit. Very much appreciated. So let's see the truth.
The ancient world had quite different values and often brutal punishments for those who disobeyed.
Yeah.
If you were the wrong kind of gay man,
Exactly.
your life could go very bad. Like you just got tortured to death bad. And I also saw forces that were much more horrific towards gays than religions could ever manage.
I think he's going to talk about the USSR.
I'm Ken Lacorte. At Elephants in Rooms, I do my best to give you a balanced presentation of what I found. And this one threw me some curveballs that weren't easy to understand or sometimes just to personally accept.
Okay, I appreciate that. Then, I guess I'll be the judge of that, and you, noble ones, will be the judge of that. Let's see. But so far, it's a good introduction because he told us what we are told when we ask that question by the activists, and a lot of that is nonsense. I mean, the one that annoyed me the most was the one about Islam. That's the one that annoyed me the most. The others we know. The one about Islam is ridiculous. Like, that one is such an insult to say, Muslims, Islam, no, in scripture, they praise it in poetry. So what? So gay people have still been thrown out of the 9th floor of a building, and to pretend that that's not happening is disrespectful to the suffering these people had to endure and still endure, even though we are in 2026. Which is why I actually kind of hope that he goes into that. But at least he kind of, with the preamble, with the preface, he explained to us that, yeah, that's nonsense. He said, it's collapsing. But anyways, the first part is dedicated to ancient to antiquity. So let's have a look.
It's a complicated world. We'll largely go through history chronologically, starting with the ancient world, where gay sex wasn't about being homosexual, but had a completely different framing. Then we'll look at the medieval times, which really lived up to its name, before turning to the urban age, and how population differences reshaped the entire landscape.
You know what's interesting? When he says that the medieval times lived up to its name, I don't know. I mean, I think what he means by that is that normally we imagine that gay people were persecuted in the Middle Ages. And when he says it lived up to it, is of course because that's true. Believe it or not, I remember making this video. I think I titled it, I Shouldn't Have Watched It. And it was a video where they were pretending that in the medieval period, being like homosexual and being gay and having gay relationships was encouraged, particularly among knights and in like monasteries. So these people, they just lie to your face. And what's insane is that you gotta choose. Are we gonna talk about, so again, it's disrespectful towards the suffering, but the reality is that it's also insane because it's illogical. Is it a minority that has been through a lot of persecution and so now it's time to stop that persecution? Or was it always accepted and lovely and everybody loved it and love is love and we should do what the ancients did because that's the message, of course. But then you can't talk about the persecution then. I mean, it's one or the other. But they don't care. They switch it, they change it depending on what message they want to try and put into your head. But before we continue, let's have a word from today's sponsor. Recently, a jury ordered Meta and YouTube to pay millions for their role in designing and promoting addictive platforms. They knew their platforms could contribute to anxiety, depression, and body image issues, but did not share those risks while prioritizing profits. The recent historic verdict underscores the consequences of those decisions. If you or your child spent years growing up on social media and experienced serious mental health struggles, you should hear this. Morgan & Morgan is stepping up to hold these platforms accountable for the harm they caused. You can use the link in my description or scan the QR code to take a short quiz to see if you qualify for a case. You may be entitled to a potential recovery of up to $1,000.
Then we'll look at the modern era, ending up just before the gay rights revolution that changed it all. Two things to note before I get going. First, I'm not going to talk much about lesbians because they just don't show up that often in historical records.
Occasional,
which is also something that holds pretty true for women in general. Secondly, This is really a look at Western culture.
Okay.
I just couldn't include the whole world in a 20-minute piece and do it justice.
I just hope you do then, because what this means is that he won't talk about the Islamic world and I imagine Asia and all of that. That's fine. I wonder if he's going to make videos about it, since he did mention this. At this point, I wouldn't have. Whatever, fine, it's his video.
Okay, so it seems counterintuitive, but we actually know quite a bit about homosexuality in the ancient world, mainly because the Greeks and Romans left us with a solid written record. And one thing that's clear from that record is that sexual orientation, or being quote-unquote gay, really wasn't on anyone's mind.
I appreciate that he said quote unquote, because obviously homosexuals existed. And if you want to use the word gay to just mean same-sex attracted, then you can use it. You can say, oh, this was a gay man in the 1st century AD. AD, don't you even try with CE. But the reality is that the reason why we need to be careful, and I think he's putting the quote-unquotes correctly here, is because oftentimes this comes with a baggage, particularly because of the LGBTQ plus community, activism. And we know that because this has spread into academia. This has spread into museums that now tell you that Emperor Elagabalus was a transgender woman, and they literally changed the pronouns. So when it comes with a baggage, it also comes with expectations. Being gay today is not the same as being gay in period. The sexual aspect is similar, still not the same, because there are repercussions. Well, I'm sure he'll explain it. I'll wait. But it's different. So putting in quotes is fine. And also, again, remember I debunked an article that was talking about transgender Vikings because they found female bones buried with funerary kit that was usually connected to warriors and therefore male. And that was the interpretation. They said, well, this must have been a transgender man, meaning a female who identified as a man. And that's projection. That didn't exist. And the whole castle of cards that I debunked together with my team was the fact that those bones, if you just clicked into the museum and actually took 5 seconds to open the page, they would tell you the bones were mixed. We have no idea what funerary kit belonged to what set of bones. So it was a castle of cards. But what amazed us as a team is, why didn't they go to, maybe it's a woman warrior? No, they had to go, it's a transgender man. And that tells you everything. That's why you need to be careful what terminology you overimpose or superimpose into the ancient world and the medieval period. Because then they will add all the rest of the baggage.
Something else that's counterintuitive about the era, the Bible. It says a lot less than most people think about homosexuality.
Well, yeah, of course, there are only a few passages. It's not like the entirety of Genesis that talks about gay.
Especially given how much it's called in arguments for and against it in the modern era. There are only a few passages in the entire Bible that directly address same-sex relations. 2 verses in Leviticus refer to men lying with other men, as with a woman, as being an abomination and prescribe death for it. Some today make the case that that's part of a larger body of law, a so-called holiness code that also forbids eating shellfish and wearing mixed fabric, rules that virtually no one enforces anymore.
All right, I have to comment on this. Well, I'll let him finish and then I'll comment.
And also the sins of Sodom and Gomorrah. They're highly debated as well. But this video really isn't about those.
Okay, so he's not going to comment on it, but then I have to. These have nothing. Whoever argues that way has no idea what they're talking about. The passages that talk about same-sex relationship, but in general, it's not even just about homosexuality. All of the passages that talk about sexual conduct, all of them, they were meant for the entirety of the people of Israel. They are relevant up to a certain extent to Christianity, but of course there is no Christian who is now called to, for example, stone adultery, put someone who commits adultery to death. Meaning, if you're a Christian and your friend tells you he cheated on his wife, you're not called to take a stone and crack his skull. Likewise, it's the same with all of other sexual sins from a biblical perspective. Why? Because as Christians, we live through a new covenant and a new law. So it's a higher law, but it's not only a higher law in the sense that, guys, you don't need to stone people to death. It's not a higher law in that sense only, but it's a higher law because, in fact, Jesus tells us, even if you think lusting in your head with a woman, you have committed adultery with her in your heart. So it's a higher law because it's also more refined, it's more subtle. It requires a higher degree of self-restraint and purity, if you will. while it's true that there are some commandments and codes and laws in the Bible that, yeah, they had to do with Bronze Age Jews or Iron Age Jews, but they don't have anything to do with Christians. We're not called to do it. For instance, circumcision, you don't have to do it. But the other thing is, wearing mixed fabric is not apt as a comparison at all with laws concerning homosexuality or sexual conduct in general, because this was not, it's not only that this is not for Christians, but it wasn't for all the Jews either. It was only for the Levite priests, and specifically strongly enforced when it came to dealing with the Ark of the Covenant. So if you were a regular Jew in the Bronze Age, you weren't this thing that some atheists do without reading the Bible, without having the context, and tell you, oh, but you're a Christian, but you wear mixed make sure that shirt is not mixed fabric. You're being stupid, because that's not what this is for. It's for the Levite priests. Likewise is the commandments on not having tattoos. Those are for Levitic priesthood. I say as someone who hates tattoos, I'll never have them in my life. But anyways.
Actually, no one enforces anymore. And also, the sins of Sodom and Gomorrah. They're highly debated as well. But this video really isn't about those debates. But know that overall, the Bible offers little explanation or attention to homosexuality. So let's turn to the Greeks and Romans, who wrote about it a lot. But we need to be especially careful here not to project our current values backwards in time. Most
Correct.
people assume that these societies had something like our concept of gay, a sexual identity that society either accepted or condemned.
Right.
Scholars say, though, that that framework really didn't exist,
Yep.
and that the people of the time wouldn't have really understood our modern distinction between being homosexual or being heterosexual.
Meaning that in period, it's not like you could have a boyfriend. Oh, this is my boyfriend. In ancient Rome, like, it's not a thing. It's not a thing, and it never was a thing.
In classical antiquity, people really didn't seem to care if you were attracted to men or women. So there was a tolerance on that part of the equation.
Careful with that, though, because when you say people, you are homogenizing. And that's another thing that I notice people don't really say. Whatever we know about what people thought, for instance, in ancient Greece or in ancient Rome, about homosexuality and that kind of homosexual sex and that kind of stuff, is the words of the elites and the words of philosophers and occasionally some historians. We have no idea what the general population thought about it. So you can't really project that. It's an important distinction. Like, imagine if like someone took the words of a professor or an academic or two today, and what they think about homosexuality, being gay, transgenderism, and then that's the only thing that remains. And in 2,000 years, people will say, oh, look, people in 2026 thought this way about same-sex. I mean, is that really representative of the entirety of the population? And I could even go into the differences within legislative norms from city-state to city-state. I will talk about it if he doesn't. But there isn't a single, oh, the Greeks thought this. In fact, even in the few fragmentary mentions, we have completely opposite. So you say they're generally tolerant. Well, did you read Xenophon about it? Did you read the laws of Sparta about it? Because, bro, they would be called homophobic immediately if I quoted any of those words, which I have, by the way, already on a dedicated video.
But what really mattered was whether you were the dominant or submissive partner.
That's true, yes.
And there was very little tolerance for those on the bottom.
Yep.
So it's wrong to think of it as a more enlightened system. Instead, it was one that crushed a different group of people. In Greece, for those on the receptive end of gay relations, it was social annihilation. If a man was known to have been sexually passive,
Well, usually if they are of higher status, we should underline, because if they are of lower status, then, I mean, people kind of knew that the elites were doing this kind of stuff. Not all, but some elites were doing it, and they were like, eh. But if someone who is of high status or had an important career role, like a governor, it had a general, and then you were found out that you were the passive side, then it would be career is over. Which kind of tells you there was a stigma. That's not tolerance, is it?
or a prostitute, he essentially ceased to be a citizen. No public participation, like voting or bringing a lawsuit or even entering certain temples.
Yep.
And if they tried to participate nonetheless, they could be executed. What was allowed? Was between adult men and boys.
You know, I do appreciate he's explaining it very well. So that's important because what you just read, of course, we should all frown upon, right? sex between adult men and boys. And so they did. They did too, by the way. Again, laws in Sparta made it illegal, but laws in Thebes didn't, as far as we know, if we are to believe Plutarch, for instance. So the reality is that it changed city-state by city-states, and some people thought it was despicable, even in period. But so should we, shouldn't we? Now, I know that you're going to tell me, but you're judging the past with the morality of the present. No, normally I would just tell you what happened. The only reason why I'm saying this is because, again, the LGBTQ plus activists, they want to depict ancient Greece as a tolerant and inclusive paradise for gays. It's about children. These, and again, not all Greeks participate. The majority of the population didn't even do this shit. Basically, it's the equivalent. What you're celebrating is Epstein Island. Just so we're clear. Does the majority of the population do the shit today that those scumbags did in Epstein Island? No. Well, most likely the majority of the population in ancient Greek didn't fuck with this shit. But there were some elites that were rich, that were powerful, and they used their power to be like, oh, I'll teach the boy. I'll teach the boy. Bring him in. And if you speak. And yeah, that's what they're celebrating when they tell us, oh, so tolerant, so gay.
It was actually institutionalized and framed as an educational arrangement between men in their 20s and boys usually between 12 and 18 years old. There was a formal ritual abduction where they would take the boys into the wilderness for 2 months, hunting and feasting with friends, and more. It wasn't a free-for-all. There were rules around it. The boy's father had to approve of the man. The boy needed to initially resist to avoid shame. And the older man wasn't just getting pleasure, but was expected to serve as a mentor to the boy.
Of course, completely irrelevant.
Helping him learn things like philosophy, hunting, and civic life.
Yeah, I'll teach you philosophy, but afterwards?
Rome was similar, but more explicit about the hierarchy of sex.
Totally.
They knew about and mocked that Greek tradition, and they viewed it as a sign of weakness.
Can you imagine that? Oh, but they're so tolerant and included. This guy's doing his research right.
For the Romans, the lines weren't about age. They were about social class. Mm-hmm. Freeborn Roman boys were untouchable.
True. Yeah, they even wore the little sun, and then little girls wore a moon-shaped piece of jewelry, a necklace around their neck, which told you these are free citizen children. You touch them, you're finished. We'll destroy you. I actually think that it's, apart from that, like, it's a nice thing. I think we should start doing it again in Italy, to wear a little sun for the boys and a little moon for the girls. I think it's adorable.
With violators subject from fines to the death penalty. Mm-hmm. But slaves, they were fair game.
I know. This is, we have to understand this is classical antiquity. It is awful the slaves were, because again, they were talking tools according to the sources. So they had no rights when it comes to this, but at least the citizen children did. And that's kind of still a step above in legislator to a lot of other civilizations of the time. So we have to give him credit for that.
Regardless of age or sex, mm-hmm. and no mentoring. Also, gay sex in the military had harsh penalties.
True.
For the dominant partner, that could mean flogging and expulsion. For the submissive, it could include being stoned or beaten to death with clubs by the entire unit. Mm-hmm. Historian and biographer Plutarch wrote about a handsome young soldier who'd been sexually harassed over a period of time by his superior officer, who was also the nephew of the unit's general. One night, after fending off multiple advances, the young soldier was summoned to his officer's tent. And when that turned towards a sexual assault, the young soldier drew his sword and killed the officer. Now, that would normally mean death, but instead he was praised and given a crown for bravery by the general, the uncle of the dead officer.
Can you imagine that?
But, as always, there were exceptions for people in power. Emperor Hadrian deified his male lover, Antinous. He founded a city in his name, erected at least 28 temples.
Wait a second. Male lover, you have to specify this. I hope he does. If he doesn't, I have to say it. I actually debunked an entire article. I think it was from the Daily Mail or something like this, that was saying Hadrian, it was love is love, and he loved so much his male lover, same thing, that he created a whole religion for it. See how much he loved him. It was a child. The relationship started when he was a little boy, not even a teenager. So no, it's not a beautiful story of love is love. You can stop it. But that's what they do. And I have to debunk it, show you the history, show you the sources that tell us about the age, and then I get called far-right fascist. What are you trying to push then? What are you trying to push? Not the guy making this video. I'm saying the people that make those kind of articles. Love is love. Look, the beautiful love. He cared for him so much. He was a little boy.
and commissioned so many statutes that the cult of Antinous briefly rivaled early Christianity. Emperor Nero had 2 public marriages to men and had a boy castrated who resembled his dead wife. But later...
I need to keep adding stuff. I have to. Guys, those marriages have zero validity within Roman law. He did do it. They didn't mean anything. Legally. Just as I have a whole dedicated video to marriage, gay marriage in ancient period and in the past, and I have it. It's an important aspect to underline.
In the empire, the shift against homosexuality increased. At first, it was driven by Roman politics.
Yeah.
There was a worry about passive homosexual behavior and the loss of masculine virtue that in some ways seemed to symbolize the empire's political submission. The first ban on male prostitution was enacted in 248 AD, but the rise of Christianity would supercharge that.
Yes.
When it became the empire's official religion, leaders enacted increasingly harsh laws, like being burned alive for male prostitution, to eventually outlawing all male homosexual activity.
Yes.
It wasn't just homosexuality that the church was changing, but a broad rewriting of Rome's moral framework.
Yes. So one thing to say about that is the following as well. Once again, those that deny that this happened and say, no, they were inclusive, they freaking loved, you could be gay and open. I wish that the people who got burnt at the stake could be brought back right now to slap you in the face for the disrespect that you're showing them and their pain. Human pain. Human pain. But on top of that, that's why I made a debunking video on the other side to those that were saying Rome fell because of the gays. But hold on a minute. When Rome fell, it was Christian. And by then, there were a lot of laws like this. There were, if anything, rampant homosexuality was not a thing by the time Rome fell. That is because the fall of Rome has nothing to do with the gays. All of Rome has a lot of economic... I have an entire video, but it's mostly... If I had to, there are a lot of reasons, but if I have to choose one, would be corruption. Internal corruption of the politicians, and then general mass discontent, and also they just didn't know how to keep those freaking borders safe from invaders. These are the 3 major reasons. It's more than that. But I would say the 3 major reasons. Also the lack of professionalism in the army. There is a lot that goes into the fall of the Roman Empire. The gays are not part of it. I just got to say it. It's just a truth.
Including laws on marriage, infanticide, and child abandonment.
Yeah.
The concept of charity for the poor became a tradition. Mm-hmm. The gladiator era ended. Rome shifted from a land most concerned with status and dominance into the new Christian emphasis on moral law and sin. And for sexual behavior, that meant shifting from who was having sex to what act was being committed.
Yep.
Before we go on, though, I want to talk about Mint Mobile, sponsor of today's...
Okay, so I'm going to skip the sponsor, but if there is a...
Check them out at
mintmobile.com. I don't see a specific... Well, I guess go watch the video because I won't react to the whole thing and click their sponsorship.
.com. Okay, so now let's turn to the later part of the Roman Empire, the medieval times. Let's broadly say 500 to 1500 AD. With the violence against
AD, my man.
Homosexuality accelerated throughout.
Yes.
Now, the laws and theology were more about sex without procreation than going after homosexuality per se.
Yeah.
They condemned masturbation, oral sex, other things.
Adultery and everything. There's a lot. It's a broad range. There is a lot of stuff you shouldn't do. And it's important to keep that in mind when we point the finger at other people. You may not be sinning like they are, and it is a sin from our perspective. We're never going to change that. I mean, some progressive churches are doing it under the influence of the devil, if you ask me. But I also sin. It's just that it's a different sin, right? In my mind, it could be a sin. Maybe my friend might do another type of sin. These are all sexual sins. Having sex before marriage is a sexual sin as well.
In reality, though, the punishments for homosexuality were far more severe.
Mm-hmm.
In the 1200s France, castration for a first offense, penis dismemberment for a second,
Holy moly.
And for the third, being burned alive.
That's terrible. That's awful. That's awful.
In Spain, the law decreed public castration, after which the convicted men were hung with their legs until dead and their bodies left to rot in public.
You know, this is why I appreciate this 50, and so should you. You should appreciate this 50 million times more than those liars that tell you, no, it was all acceptable. It was love is love and nobody cares and everyone. There are in academia, there are so many articles these days. I've debunked a few that tell you about homosexual acceptance in the Middle Ages. No, this is the reality. This is what happened. This.
Permanently. English law recommended that they be buried alive or drawn and quartered. Of course, laws weren't applied universally, and none of this applied if you were royalty.
Of course.
The courts of the English monarchs were famously full of same-sex relationships.
Right.
Edward II, who ruled in the early 1300s, and his favorite knight were described by contemporary writers in unmistakably romantic terms. They wrote that Edward bound himself
Man, look at that frog mouth at the bottom there. It looks amazing. Epic.
to him before all other mortals. And they said he caused a scandal by giving the knight the place of honor at his coronation and even wearing the man's jewelry and colors rather than those of his new queen, Isabella of France.
Man.
King James I,
scandal.
the man who commissioned the King James Bible, he wrote letters to the Duke of Buckingham, addressing him as my sweet child and wife, and signing them my dear dad and husband. He also had a secret passageway to the Duke's bedroom, although their relationship is still debated by historians. So in 1533...
And some of these relationships are debated, by the way, precisely because they had to be kept hidden. So there was so much, up to a certain extent, they knew they could get away with it because of power and connection, but still, it's kind of playing with fire. So this is why it's difficult. We looked at these letters written by Michelangelo, the sculptor, artist of the Middle Ages, Renaissance, and it does sound like he was into one of his models, guys, and sexually attracted, but you have to read in between the lines. We read the letters in medieval Italian because someone brought that up to me in the comments. They said, there are some people say that Michelangelo was gay. Is this true? And the reason why they're asking me is because, of course, they know I'm not going to push any nonsense for politics. If anything, I'm going to dismantle it. You know me. I hate LGBTQ activism because it's bullshit when it comes to history. But we looked into it. We read the medieval Italian. I understand medieval Italian. It really sounded like my main researcher. We read it. We looked at each other. We're like, well, I mean, that does sound like it sounds like a gay man, to be honest. It does sound like a gay man. Can I say it 100%? No, because it's still reading in between the lines. But if you asked me my professional opinion, drop all the politics, drop all the nonsense. Do you think Michelangelo was gay? I would say, yeah, probably. And that's that. And if I tell you that, you know that it's based on sources, not on nonsense.
Henry VIII transferred sodomy from church courts to secular law with the Buggery Act, saying that it was for moral reasons. But the truer purpose was political, stripping the clergy of legal protections as part of his campaign to dissolve the monasteries. A priest could now be executed for sodomy, although ironically not for murder. And that law's overall language, it became the template for anti-gay laws exported across the British Empire. Some are still on the books in dozens of countries today. By the 1700s,
I wonder what countries, to be honest.
things started loosening up, but certainly not completely. The public executions of outed gay men that marked the earlier centuries, they lessened, but they continued well into the 1800s in Europe. Public records show that 82 men were executed for sodomy in the Netherlands alone in 1730 and 31.
Holy man.
They were killed by strangling, burning, or drowning them in barrels of water.
This is atrocious. It makes my heart ache. Because I imagine a good friend of mine in that situation. If you dehumanize someone because they're Christian, because they're white, because they're black, because they're gay, because of whatever you want, and you think that every person that could be included in that group is the same as the very worst that group has to offer, then you have been brainwashed. Now, of course, there are statistics. We have to look into the statistics, for example, when we look at violence by religion and extremism, or the type of crimes that happen in Europe because of migrants, illegals. Now, there are statistics and per capita, like that's real. And looking at the data is not racist. But still, let's not take the innocents and condemn them all with the guilty. No, I say get every single actual guilty person who is evil and let them see justice, receive justice. But at the same time, if we condemn the innocent, if we condemn people that are not evil, then we are in an awful position, and we're losing our humanity.
The British were still executing gay men as late as 1835, with the hanging of 2 men caught together in a rented room. And across the ocean in America, in 1776, male homosexual acts were punishable by death in all 13 colonies. But there aren't any records of
13 because they were the original colonies, of course. That's why you have 13 stripes on the flag, by the way.
execution for that in the new United States. If I screwed up any of these facts, tell me in the comments and I'll address it in the description box, where you can also find my script and research notes.
Okay.
This is a field that's dominated by really more anecdotes than data, so there's a million ways to present it.
Of course. Okay, so we are halfway through the video exactly. So the next point is going to be about the urban age, and then he'll finish with the modern era. So I'm going to strongly suggest you, since he must have put a lot of research into this, to go and check it out. So please do finish the video on your own by clicking the link in the description on the pinned comment. But so far, I have to say that he has shared the information, the data, the way he understands it through his research, and it didn't look like he was trying to push any weird pro-LGBTQ message, nor was he pushing some, we need to, like, a hateful message either towards people that are different than us. So at the end of the day, I do appreciate the video so far. I haven't watched the rest, of course. Maybe he will say some bullshit at the end, or maybe he won't. I don't know. You let me know, and I will continue it on my own. But for today's reaction video, thank you for watching, and have a great day. Bye. If you appreciate my content so far and wish to help ensure my ability to continue to tell it how it is, regardless of any possible backlash, please support this channel on Patreon. Any support helps me and my team of academics keep the channel strong and gives us the means to fight back against the political rewriting of history. Stand with us, form the wall, defend the truth.